Welcome everyone. My name is Ken Adams. I'm delighted to host today. Just to kick us off, I'm pleased to introduce Wurundjeri Elder Auntie Georgina Nicholson, who has generously agreed to pre-record a welcome to country. We've had some technology issues, but Auntie Georgina's gone out of her way to make us feel welcome, and so I hand over to you, Auntie Georgina. Welcome everyone. My name is Ken Adams. I'm delighted to host today. Just to kick us off, I'm pleased to introduce Wurundjeri Elder Auntie Georgina Nicholson, who has generously agreed to pre-record a welcome to country. We've had some technology issues, but Auntie Georgina's gone out of her way to make us feel welcome, and so I hand over to you, Auntie Georgina.
Thank you for your introduction. Hello everyone, my name is Georgina Nicholson and I am a proud Wurundjeri Woiwurrung woman. Wurundjeri being part of the Kulin Nation. The Kulin Nation consists of 5 clans, I believe, and they are Wurundjeri, Wathaurong, Tanarong, Boonwurrung and Dja Dja Wurrung. Wurundjeri being all of Melbourne CBD and surrounding country, extending north to the Great Divide, east to Mount Baw Baw, south to Mordialloc Creek and west to the mouth of Werribee River. So I would like to acknowledge and pay my respect to our ancestors who walked and lived on this land as free spirits for a very, very long time. Also pay my respects to our elders past, present and emerging. And I would also like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us today, and I pay my respects to you all and to your elders. So I want to say to ANZ, thank you. I would like to thank you for incorporating an important ancient custom into your event today, a welcome to country. I would like to acknowledge all people who have joined us today to celebrate the strength and resilience of our elders past and present. All peoples who have joined for this event today. I would like to acknowledge people that are coming in from Wurundjeri country. I would like to say to you, Womanjika, Wurundjeri Balak, Yemen Kundibik. I would just like to tell you what I've said in our Woiwurrung language, and that is welcome to the land of the Wurundjeri people. For those of you tuning in from across locations across Victoria, Australia and perhaps beyond, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which you are listening from, and I would like to pay my respect to you all and to your elders. So as we navigate our way through this COVID-19 pandemic, which is 2023 now and it's still around, it ain't going anywhere in a hurry. So I believe it's going to be around for a very long time. I reflect on the legacy of those who have come before me, and I reflect on the long, unbroken, strong line of Aboriginal women I come from, and I think about the challenges they've faced and still do face. And I do draw some strength from them. And one of those women being my mother, Martha Margaret Nicholson, nee Terrick. She was delivered by her grandmother, Granny Jemima, and that was on Corrandirk Aboriginal Mission near the present-day town of Healesville. So Granny Jemima was already teaching our mother the importance of family, culture, caring for one another and connection to land. Years later, our mother met a deadly Irishman called Patrick, and that was on a blind date in Melbourne in the early 1930s. In 1937, Mummy and Daddy were married in a registry office, and they had 16 children, 8 boys, 8 girls, all single babies, so no twins, so no cheating, LOL. I'm the youngest of the 16 and my sister Pat Ockwell is the eldest. Sister Pat is an amazing senior elder who has made a lifelong commitment to her communities and to her peoples. Sister Pat is now 84, and for an Aboriginal woman to reach this age is a milestone. For our life expectancy gap is about probably 10 to 15 year gap, and it's quite a large gap for our peoples. That's why we are pretty much constantly always in sorry business. We do have a lot of deaths in our families and communities. But we must carry on our culture for our people as our ancestors did, and my mother and her mother and so on have done for us. So I stand here today because of my mother, Martha Nicholson. She was a strong cultural woman who instilled great values in me. William Barrack, his younger sister Annie Barratt, that is my direct bloodline right there. So one of our traditions being our Wurrung language, it is part of our rich, deep heritage, and I like to say our language has been sleeping, but we are waking it up now. My niece Mandy Nicholson says that, and I like the way she puts that. Some of the ways we keep our culture alive is through songs, stories and performances. So the coronavirus pandemic has changed the world in ways we would never have imagined, and the implications for our communities have been profound for our health, our well-being and our jobs. But in many ways this event online today has brought into focus the importance of relationships with family and connecting with one another as a community. And I think as people we do crave and need connection, and I didn't realise how important this was until it was taken from us. It's been quite a mentally challenging time and a lonely time for myself because I live alone. So Aboriginal culture is the longest, oldest continuing culture. It dates back to 60,000 years plus. So we as Aboriginal people, we do know about resilience, solidarity and connection to land. There have been no treaties with us up to date. Hopefully that will change in the near future, and our future generations will get benefits from that. We have never ceded our sovereignty, so our ancestors didn't sell our land or gift it or give it away. It was stolen from us. So Wurundjeri people would just like to ask you all to please respect the land, the waters, the flora and the fauna. And of course we all respect each other, and having this relationship is fantastic to be able to do. Welcome to country with you. Take care and stay safe everyone, and enjoy this event. It's a very important event. Thank you.
And thank you, Auntie Georgina, for that wonderful welcome to country. I would like to acknowledge country. I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people here by the Birrarung in ANZ's head office. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders of the Wurundjeri people, past, present and emerging. And I'd like to acknowledge First Nations people joining us today for what we hope is a really informative conversation. I'd also like to thank the substantial number, well over 200 people we've got online joining us today to listen to two fabulous guest speakers discuss the topic about constitutional recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the decision that lies ahead of us. For those of you who may have questions, thank you for joining today. It's a step about being informed to make an important decision later this year. I'd also like to thank our guest speakers who I'll come to shortly and introduce them both. But I thought I might just say a few words about why at ANZ we think the Uluru Statement from the Heart is a critical step for Australia. At ANZ, and this resonates with over 95% of our people who can clearly state that our purpose is to shape a world where people and communities thrive. We reflected on that for many months at an executive committee level and a board level about what did that mean for ANZ as an organisation. and Shane Elliott in March 22, on behalf of ANZ employees, accepted the generous invitation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, an invitation to walk together for a better future. We didn't do so lightly, but the alignment with our purpose was very clear. The approach we chose to take in the lead up to the referendum was to help our staff make an informed decision. Inevitably, that involves outlining some uncomfortable aspects of Australia's past, and I want to touch on that briefly. Today's session about the path to constitutional recognition is something that Alex Burns, a proud Neurobullock man who works at ANZ, and I recently wrote about. What we found as we looked into it was that the Constitution reflected the coming together of 6 colonies to form the Commonwealth. They are expressly referred to in the Constitution. Aboriginal Australians are not only not recognised in the Constitution, they were expressly not counted in Australia's population. That goes to the critical question of state representation in Parliament. That is, not only were they not recognised and not counted, the constitutional DNA of the coming together of the 6 colonies chose to actively discriminate against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. For those of you who are able to vote in Australia later this year, you will have an opportunity to have your say through a referendum. In the lead up to the referendum, we will continue to provide our people with opportunities to understand what a voice to Parliament will mean for all Australians. I know it can be hard to hear about Australia's past, especially for the many of us who recognise the extraordinarily positive facets of Australian life and Australian society. And it is true that no one on this call today was present when those decisions were made to not recognise Aboriginal Australians in the Constitution and who made the decision to say they actually do not count. The question facing all Australians later this year is understanding what has happened in the past. What is the right thing to do today for a better Australia? We understand that people will hold many views, and at times we will need to reasonably disagree with one another. ANZ as an organisation believes that we have an opportunity to participate in meaningful, lasting change. And by supporting the establishment of a First Nations voice to Parliament, we are living our purpose. That is only one factor for you to consider in the lead up to the referendum. We hope you find occasions like this useful and informative. For those of you who will have questions, and we welcome them, you can pop your question into a chat function and we'll collect those during the course of the discussion, and we'll try to answer your questions as best we can. And in line with our approach to educating our staff, we've got 2 fabulous speakers today that we can have a conversation with. First, I'm really excited to welcome Kyra Galante. Kyra is a Gaburn woman from the Goldfields region in Western Australia, having connections to Noongar country. Kyra does many wonderful things, as I've learnt during the course of the day today, but she's considered a pioneer for First Nations women in mining. Kyra has over 20 years experience delivering First Nations community engagement, recruitment, mentoring and strategies in civil construction and mining. She is regarded for supporting women to thrive in industry while managing fly-in, fly-out life and all the pressure that comes with it. There are many, many things that could be said about Kyra, actually, as I learned from many people this morning. She received a Telstra Women in Business Award 2017 and was named the Western Australia Chamber of Minerals and Energy Most Outstanding Women in Resources in 2014. She joins us today as an ambassador for the Yes campaign that supports the voice to Parliament. Kyra, thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you for that wonderful welcome, Ken. You never get used to hearing people talk about you because you just get busy doing what you have to do. But I also want to acknowledge my own ancestors, the Gubrin people. I'm actually calling in today from my own country. I decided to come home for the week celebrations of NAIDOC week, and what a great way to celebrate our elders. And I think it's our elders that have brought us on this journey of where we are right now. So just to give a bit of background to the Uluru Statement, in 2017, we had many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from all around the country who were selected through a democratic process, through their communities, through their Aboriginal organisations, corporations, who they wanted to represent them at this important event where they came out and presented the Uluru Statement. Now, to be clear, this is not the first ARCs of our people. We've had many petitions to queens, kings and past governments for more than 4 decades asking for a voice, just to have a seat at the table so that we can have say on matters that just affect us and affect us only. And the Uluru Statement is a beautiful gift to the Australian people. And I'm sure many of you here have read it. If not, please, I encourage you all to read it. And this is what makes it different, this one ARCs around the Uluru Statement. It's a gift to the Australian people. It's not political because we're not asking government. We are asking all of you here to actually come to a referendum and vote if you think that our people should have a voice to Parliament. There's a few elements to the beauty of this, and I guess it's putting us in our rightful place in our country, getting on the right side of history is the first step, which is why constitutional recognition is important for us. As Ken highlighted and spoke about, we are not there. What is there is around creating laws to actually control us. And there's a history of that happening here in this country. And there's been many, many reports that have come out. And a really good website to look at some of those reports is on Reconciliation Australia. So they have a lot of wealth of resource there around what those reports are, where many recommendations have been made to government around our children being removed at a higher rate. To this day, if we think that we had one stolen generation when colonise happened in this country, we actually have more coming through, and it's higher than ever before. So we have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children who are not living with biological family to this day. We also have the high rates of our children, women and men in incarceration. We're overrepresented there. And so these are some of the important factors of where we want to have positive changes through having a voice to Parliament. And I'll say a voice to Parliament, not a voice in Parliament. And it's clearly defined. I know there's a lot of questions out there about having First Nations people representatives in politics, but keep in mind that they represent their parties who represent their constituents in this country. So a voice to Parliament will be made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who will become the voice for all their regions and their communities, sitting in Parliament to just advise and make recommendations to government on laws and policies that just affect us and us only on the ground in how services are delivered to our people. We know the solutions for our people. There's a lot of facts out there, and if that's one thing I can make pretty clear, a lot of this you can research yourself. So I encourage all of you to go away and research and find the facts, because the facts never lie and the facts tell a story around the arcs of what we're wanting. But I also want to highlight the fact that this is a defining moment for us in our country. And the one thing that connects all of us is this land that we all call home. And we're more united in that sense of having a home that we all love and we embrace. And as many other countries call us, the lucky country. Unfortunately, that's not the lives of my people. We have the lived experiences of dealing with grief, trauma, intergenerational trauma, which is resulting in lack of services being delivered to our people on the ground because we don't have the voice to Parliament to advise government around the laws and policies. So this is how it plays out in this country. But what I do look forward to, I look forward to the hope that we all hold on to, that the Australian people will do the right thing, because times are changing and it's all about inclusion. It's about equality and equity. It's a practical ask for a voice. And keep in mind, the future generations, which is our children and your children and all of our great-grandchildren, will inherit the outcome of what this referendum will be. And if I had to visualize what that looks like, it's where they will walk together side by side in shaping this country to what we know it could and should be, which is about embracing First Nations people and culture as the oldest living culture in the world, which will make us unique in comparison to all the other countries, and amplifying that to the rest of the world. And that is the thing that I hold on to, that gives me hope for a better future, not just for us, but for all Australians. So I think that, and there's more resources out there as well. You've got the Uluru Statement. Please go to their website as well. And we also have a website, Yes23. So there's many different resources that are out there, but you will find that there's many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people right across Australia who are in support of the voice. We have more than 80% of our people who are in support of the voice right across this nation. And we're still engaging right across this nation to our people in our communities around the voice, so that they fully understand what this is. And I do get asked the regular questions about whether or not, why some people don't support the voice, but I think it's important for everyone to understand that democracy is good for our country. We don't expect all Australians to vote 100% every time we have voting for the government at election time. And it's exactly the same with us. It's exactly the same. So we, even in our families and our communities, we have the same. We have people's views and reasons as to why they won't, and that's okay. But it's about democracy. So thank you, and I'll hand it back over to you, Ken.
Thank you so much, Kyra. Look, there's a lot that's really important there. Probably two themes just to pick up on what Kyra said. We spoke about our history in Australia of division, and I think there's real power in unity. The coming together of Australian and non-Indigenous Australians and Indigenous Australians is a real opportunity for us. There'll be immense power if we can harness that. And to be honest, that 60,000 years is a critical part of our shared history. It's what we have in common. I think the second thing is, you know, the Uluru Statement from the Heart is not intended to be politicised. It's an invitation to Australian people, no question. And we've watched play out in the media, understandably, the politicisation of the issue. The designers of the Uluru Statement of the Heart recognised that was going to happen, and that's why they directed it to the Australian people. And so this is an invitation to each of us. On the point of the support, I completely agree. We should expect people to reasonably hold different views about this topic. But it can be hard to see where support lies amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So there's only two major surveys that I can identify in relation to this. One has 80% in support and the other has 83% in support. But importantly, only 10% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are actually against, and another 10% wanted to learn more and to have more conversations. If you think about any electoral issue in Australia, any social issue, the idea that you get 80 or 80+% and only 10% opposition is overwhelming support. And even then it might be said, and Kyra's absolutely right, politicians need to represent their parties and their constituencies. But even if you look, there are currently 11 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members of Parliament. 8 of those strongly support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. 1 would like more information and 2 do not support it. Again, reflective of where our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are. And so it can be difficult. You hear all the noise in the media, is there division about this? Yes, of course. In a democratic society, people will and should have different views, and they should challenge and debate them, hopefully respectfully. But I just want to dispel this notion that this has anything but very strong support from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. So thank you, Kyra. That was absolutely fabulous insight. You know, we could chat to you all day about this because it's got a remarkable history. And we'll have some questions for Kyra towards the end of the session. But without further delay, let me introduce Dempsey Bloom. Dempsey is a Gomeroi man from the Barradine, a small country town in regional New South Wales. He's also a Know Your Customer team leader here at ANZ. Dempsey was elected the Youth Premier of the Queensland Indigenous Youth Parliament in 2022, an extraordinary achievement. Dempsey has used his platform to speak about the ongoing campaign for the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the upcoming referendum. He continues to advocate for better outcomes, not only for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, but for all Australians. Dempsey, thank you so much for joining us today, and over to you.
Thanks, Ken. Pleasure to be here, and thank you, Kyra, for your words. Yamagara Gindagunu. Hello, greetings. How are you all? This is a greeting in the language of the Gomeroi people, who are my people from central New South Wales. I am a direct descendant of Mary Jane Cain, also known as Queenie Cain. She's a mother figure to all of our people and successfully petitioned the government and Queen Victoria for a parcel of land for a community in 1912. We've got to think long before Vincent Lingiari in 75 and Mabo in 92. I began my ANZ journey 9 years ago as a full-time Indigenous trainee in the Liverpool branch in southwest Sydney. Having started my journey as a trainee, it was amazingly uplifting experience when I had the chance to hire my own full-time Indigenous trainee when I was a branch manager many years later. I am originally from New South Wales, though I've moved up to Queensland and certainly still support the New South Wales team when it comes to state of origin, even if they've let us down of late, but I can't really help there. When I did move to Queensland a few years ago, I lost my connections to the community in which I'd lived. I've always had a great interest in politics and advocacy, but I found it was hard to get started in a new city and a new state. I think we can all agree. So in order to get back into it and meet some new people, I was looking around to see what I could get involved in. So last year I put my hand up for a few programs, including the Queensland Indigenous Youth Leadership Program, as well as the Queensland Youth Parliament. From this, I was also a member of the Indigenous Youth Advisory Committee for the Queensland Youth Strategy Review, working with the department and the Minister to do so. I was lucky enough again to be elected Premier of the Queensland Indigenous Youth Parliament and certainly humbled to have been elected Leader of the Opposition of the Queensland Youth Parliament. Talk about seeing things from a different perspective. So in these capacities, I was also privileged to attend the Queensland Path to Treaty Commitment signing along with the Premier, Cabinet and prominent leaders from Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. I'm proud of the work that the state governments indeed are undertaking in this area, as I believe the treaty processes really need to begin at a state level, because as we all know, First Nations people were solely under the jurisdiction of the states until the '67 referendum. I've met some amazing people during this time who are doing some great work in our communities and abroad, including First Nations and the role that we play in shaping our Pacific and international relations. Further to this, I've been undertaking the preliminary work of Pathways to Parliament program, focused on uncovering tangible pathways to Parliament and politics for First Nations people. To my surprise, in both of these programs, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike were unaware of the Statement from the Heart and the upcoming campaign for the Voice. So from then, I made it my mission to advocate for the Voice and utilising that platform within Parliament House to do so. That speech is on YouTube. If you do wish to check it out, hit me up. I'll have to plug that there for sure. Some of the other things we discussed were child safety, which of course, Kyra, you mentioned when it comes to the stolen generation. It's stolen generations, plural. Of course, we're still seeing it these days. We also talked about reforms to the public trustee system. Mandatory vaccinations was another one, along with many other hot topics. Additionally, we debated the idea of a state voice to Parliament, where I led the debate against the very question in the spirit of ensuring we did not distract from the federal campaign for the Voice. It was an amazing experience to advocate for the voice using that platform. But as we know, politics can only get us so far, and I'm pleased that the official parliamentary and political debate is over and that the campaign moves back to where it originated, at the grassroots level. Just like Kyra mentioned, it's an invitation to the people of Australia. And that is why it's so important to start discussing with family, friends, colleagues, and the like. There's only one person in this call that can impact the direction of the campaign. Not me, it's not Kyra, it's not even Ken, it's you sitting here watching today. We've got 245 attendees here, so it's very important that we continue the grassroots conversations. It's the dinner table conversations, the chat over a cup of coffee, the workplace events and more that will bring a positive outcome to the campaign. For me personally, I believe it's important that an acknowledgement of country is not something that is purely symbolic, but also informative and educational. So for each and every acknowledgement that I undertake in my workplace or communities, I ensure that I share the knowledge and history, as well as making people aware of the current campaign and where to go for information. So thanks, Kyra, for sharing those resources. When people ask me about the voice, and they are undecided, they're sitting on the fence, I don't dictate to them how they should vote. Rather, I like to leave them with this message. The voice needs to be looked at under two different lenses. We need to use our heads and our hearts when considering the measure before us. Our heads, because we know the symbolism of constitutional recognition is the right thing to do and is a healing measure in order for us to walk together for a brighter future for all. And our heads, because we know there needs to be a practical hands-on element in the form of a voice to Parliament. And we know that there is a long way to go into closing the gap, and we are diminished as a nation until we do so. And if, in my opinion, if someone does use their head and heart when coming to that decision, the choice is undoubtedly a yes. However, of course, there is a sizable no campaign, and that is why it's so important that we have the backing of the private sector and corporate Australia. I compare it to the same-sex marriage plebiscite we had a few years back, and without the support of the corporate sector, indeed, we would not have had the great result that we did. Not only do we, ANZ included, play a significant part in the public campaign, the work that we do internally, talking reconciliation action plans, advisory bodies, cultural awareness and training, recruitment and career strategies, and a whole lot more. They play a major role in reshaping the narrative. Got to remember that history didn't begin in 1788, nor did it end. We have a really long way to go. We only need to look at our neighbours across the ditch to see a standard that we could one day have for our own. The past attempts for a voice to Parliament have been fleeting. We've seen bodies come and go, set up to fail and disbanded by successive governments. Things need to change, and that is why constitutional recognition is vital. My final point is this: history is calling, and if not now, when? Before I hand back though, I was given 10 minutes for my segment, though I deliberately kept my contributions short in order to give more time back for the Q&A portion. So I just ask, please shoot us as many questions as you have. I'm happy to take the tough or controversial questions. I believe it's important so that we cover the wide spectrum of views and really get that out there. So I hand back to you, Ken. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dempsey. Look, the first question we've had is really, how can we effectively respond to people who say that we need more information about how the voice will work in a practical sense when we don't have the layout and the detail that we would expect at this point? So Kyra, so there's a few aspects of that question. One, how is the voice going to work in practice and what detail is out there? And I'm happy to answer it from a constitutional law perspective, which is a very different lens. But can you just give us a feel for how you see this will work and what detail is available out there to inform people about how the voice will work?
So I can give an example with where having a voice in comparison to not having a voice. So at the moment, through Aboriginal community controlled organisations, they have cultural frameworks that they operate within in how to do services being delivered on the ground to the people, our people, to ensure that we're getting a positive impact. And so operating within these cultural frameworks because we have to be mindful that we also have to adhere to cultural protocols. So we have, men and women's business. So you will never get men go out and talk to women about birthing. You will have women who go out and talk to women about birthing, pregnancy, prenatal, all of those things. That's a cultural protocol. You will, and it would be vice versa for men. You will never get women going to talk who work for Aboriginal community controlled organisations to talk about men's health. It would be more men, because that's men's business. So that's how we operate within our cultural framework. At the moment, when it's outsourced to mainstream services, they don't have cultural frameworks in place. And so what does that do? Language becomes a barrier. Not identifying how they communicate to our people to fully understand what their health needs are, to then be able to put in place health plans that are for them to understand, but know and have input into that, of sorting out what their own health issues are, but having a plan to actually get them on the healing journey. That doesn't happen. So, and then there's also racism and discrimination in services being delivered to our people as well. And so our people are getting misdiagnosed as well, based on language, racism, and a whole bunch. And I can give so many because I've got so much lived experience just with this happening in my own family, me having to advocate for Aboriginal people who are faced with this just in health. And that's in health, but then we also have education, we have employment, we have training. These are all the areas around where we're providing services to our people to have equity and equality, and that is not happening. And so when you see a lot of money being spent to Indigenous employment, Indigenous health, it's not effective for us, because there's money being pumped in that goes towards recruiting more people who are non-Indigenous, but not operating within cultural frameworks and how to deliver it positively to have a positive impact to our people on the ground. And that's the difference between mainstream services and delivering it through Aboriginal community controlled organisation. And it's also taking into account that we're a very diverse, unique race of people in our own country. So we have diversity within diversity. So how you deliver it in my country will be different how we deliver it in Boorloo, Perth, West Australia, to Meanjin, Turrbal country over in Brisbane, because the group of people are completely different. And that's something that is important that we need to recognise as well.
Thanks, Kyra. It's a really good practical example of how a voice would operate differently to how things have operated in the past, and how you would get, therefore, a better practical outcome than you would otherwise could hope to achieve. And Dempsey, just on this first question around, the voice, how it will practically operate, and the detail, can I just throw to you to answer that question as well?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really great question, actually, and that's something we're hearing in the media cycle as well, and something we really need to make the distinction that the voice referendum is to enshrine the notion of representation in the Constitution. We've had bodies come and go in the past, like I've mentioned, we've got ATSIC and many others. It's not about enshrining a particular model in the Constitution. That's the distinction we need to make. The format of the voice will need to adapt with the times, just as any and all legislation does. The majority of work that parliamentarians do is amending legislation, not necessarily bringing forward new legislation. So that is why the Parliament will maintain primacy and the ability to reform the body. To give you a practical example, we wouldn't want to go to a referendum every 10 years in order to amend the voice, the model that the voice follows. So that's just the distinction I'd like to make there. Thanks, Ken.
That's a really important point, Dempsey, and I suppose to bring a legal lens to this, this is difficult for people who are not necessarily accustomed to dealing with constitutional reform and legislation and what's the difference. But if I can take just 2 minutes to develop that point a little bit. The Australian Constitution, what it does, it's a very short document. It actually vests power and authority in structures, and then, as Dempsey said, it's for the Parliament to develop how that operates day to day. So to give you one example, government is made up of the legislature, the executive and the judiciary. They're the three limbs of government. And so way back in 1901, when they decided to establish the judiciary, there was one section of the Constitution dedicated to it, which said, at section 71, there shall be a supreme judicial body of Australia, which shall be called the High Court of Australia. That's it. No detail, not how many judges, not where they would sit, not how you got to appeal to that body. A full 2 years later, after the Constitution decided that the High Court would be the repository of the power, the judicial power of the Commonwealth, came the Judiciary Act. And precisely as Dempsey said, incidentally, that Act has been amended over 70 times. That's actually the Parliament process working. The detail needs to adapt, as the voice will need to adapt in coming years. And so we have now, by the way, very detailed design principles. It shall be transparent. It shall be accountable. It shall be representative. It will be gender balanced. And so you have really very clear distillation of the design principles of the voice, but you have Parliament who will fill in the detail. What we've seen recently is the discussion like the absence of detail is somehow a bad thing. I would say on the contrary, it's a good thing. It would be misleading to give you a whole lot of detail as part of the referendum and say that will be forever set in concrete. That's not the way our Constitution works, and it's actually not the way our parliamentary system works. So this is very orthodox to get a short, pithy statement about what the voice will be, to vest it with power, and then lead the government of the day to make sure that it is working and it's fit for purpose. And so somehow this notion, and it's interesting, 29% of Australians have become convinced that there's not enough detail around the voice. I would say there's an unprecedented amount of detail, including, for example, the release of the Attorney General's advice on how the voice would work, which I don't think has ever happened before. So quite remarkable. Hey, next question, and I might go to you, Dempsey, in the first instance. There's a lot of curiosity because Anthony, the Uluru Statement from the Heart is much bigger than the voice. It also extends to treaty. What practically does that mean, and how should Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians think about that?
Yeah, it's a really good one to talk about because, of course, in the journey of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, we've got voice, treaty, truth. And in that order, we're now at chapter 1, voice. We're at the very start, but of course, there's a lot more to come. Treaty is the next process, of course, that we look at post-voice. We only need to look at our brothers and sisters in New Zealand to see the positive and uplifting effect of what a treaty can have, not only on First Nations people, but the nation more broadly. There is a minority out there of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people who are asking for a treaty before the voice. 2 points on that. How is this treaty to be negotiated without implementing a representational voice? That's my question to those in the minority there. Who are we negotiating this treaty with? And my second point, as I touched on before in my prior comments, several states, including Victoria and Queensland, we're proudly doing some amazing work on state treaty process to advance that. That is a long process that involves collaborating across multiple communities, non-Indigenous and Indigenous alike. And I think that it's important that we start with our state treaty processes. Again, until 1967, the referendum, Indigenous people fell under the jurisdiction of the states. The Commonwealth did not have jurisdiction over Indigenous people until that point in time. And to come to think of it, when First Contact was established, it wasn't until 1901 that we had the Commonwealth of Australia. So I think it's very important from a symbolic perspective that we have the state treaty processes commence first. But in terms of a tangible perspective, that we don't distract from the voice campaign. It's important that we have that representation first and foremost, and then we can start to look to the treaty process. So that's my thoughts on that. Thanks for the question.
Thanks very much, Dempsey. And Kyra, on the important questions of truth-telling and treaty, what would you say?
Yeah, look, I think when the dialogues came out with the voice first, it was a fair practical ask, and it's something you could do within a term of government. But they also recognise that you do need the voice to get the treaty and the truth. And if people know anything about treaties, they take decades to actually go through and get that process. I mean, Victoria's been in it for a fair few years right now. And if you look at other treaties that happen around the country, they didn't happen straight away. They took decades because you have to consider all the different language groups that come within that state and their boundaries. So again, you need a voice to get treaty. And truth telling is also what you need a voice to do, which is the Makarrata. Being able to tell the truth of our history in Australia, to be able to heal the nation and move forward as a country, because we're all on this journey together, but it's about acknowledging our truth of what really happened in our country. And it's not about blame. That's not what this is about. It's not about making people feel bad about it. It's about telling the truth. And once we tell the truth, it becomes something that we sit comfortably with once we know, and we can talk about it, and it becomes part of our history in this country of telling that in how we move forward as a country and heal together as a country. And if anything, it just unites us as a country and the people of country.
Thanks, Kyra. And I guess only two brief comments from me. Sometimes the way that opposition's put is we should go straight to treaty and not be distracted by truth. It's as if we're not capable of doing two things at once. And I'm not sure that's true. The Uluru Statement from the Heart calls on us to do three things. Calls us to have a voice, to listen and really listen, and then to come together through treaty, through the making of agreements between people. And, as a reformed litigator, one thing I know is that if you rush into a settlement and people don't properly understand the background, and they don't understand each other's position, and they haven't heard the truth, there can be frustration with that agreement. And as Kyra says, you would reasonably expect treaty to take a long time. The designers of the Uluru Voice were very careful in their design. Their preference was first the voice to be heard, to deal with the deficiencies that exist at the moment, then to really reflect on some of the truths that we're told, and they go far further than what we've outlined today, but for all Australians to really understand that, and then in an informed way to make agreement, to unite. And so it was a very carefully considered order. That's not to say you can't reasonably prefer a different order. My point is, we can quibble about orders. That doesn't sound like a real reason not to have a voice. And I think we can do two things at once. I think we can progress truth-telling and voice and treaty. But first, in the current term of government, the aim is to establish a voice. But it's a really good question. It's around the design principles that was the subject of very careful thought. The next question is, and it's a difficult question for you to ask, Kyra. But there's a question saying, for those who do not support the voice, what is it do you think that they are concerned that they will lose?
Oh, look, it's not the first time this has come out. If we look at native title in the past, people thought they were going to lose their land and their houses when native title first came into play in Australia. And this is all part of the tactic of the No campaign, is making people feel that they're going to lose something rather than gain something. It will not affect any Australian people's lives. What it will do is it will just enable us to have more self-determination over the affairs that affect us. And as a matter of fact, what it will do is, we talk about taxpayers' dollars being spent in Indigenous affairs, whether it's housing, education, health. We're actually making the taxpayers' money decrease by actually closing the Indigenous disadvantage gap. But I think this has always been a tactic of the Conservatives, is making sure that whenever anything comes out where it's advancing First Nations people here in Australia, they make it seem and believe that they're going to lose something. But no one's going to lose anything. You're just going to gain something. And that's why we say there's a difference between uniting and dividing. It's not dividing the nation. It's going to unite the nation and the people of the nation. And just, in a snapshot to understand this a little bit better, we have the highest demographics in our country are the youth population. And these young people are so intelligent. Dempsey's one of them, very intelligent. You hear him speak, he's a great leader, future leader, but they have easy access to information. So they have a social conscience. They also engage with First Nations people. They're learning more about culture through their networks, through the sporting clubs, through their schools. We celebrate National Reconciliation Week, NAIDOC Week here in this country. And so these are going to be the future leaders, and they want change. And I think if we should be listening to anyone, it should be them, because they already understand the difference between justice and injustice, and understanding the value of our people and our culture and our history.
Thanks, Kyra. It's a great point, well made, that the notion that someone is going to receive something, that it must come from another place and therefore someone's worse off. Those 2 points are not mutually exclusive. Both, as you said right at the outset, this is both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people can benefit from this. And Dempsey, just on that question, how do you see it?
Yeah, thanks. I absolutely agree with you, Kyra. Again, it's very similar to the same-sex marriage debate we had. Apparently, the world was going to end the day after it was passed. No other community lost any rights. There was no snowball effect. So there are some in the no camp for this campaign that believe that uplifting a group in the society that are the most disadvantaged in the world, let's call it out for what it is, that will somehow diminish the rights of others in society. That is completely untrue. We are all diminished as a nation unless we address the history and focus on the future together. Like Kyra said, it's not about blaming anyone. It's about coming together and sharing in this journey together. We have the oldest continuing cultures in the world. Just think about that. No other nation can lay claim to that. We should be proud as a united country, but these abhorrent statistics, when we look at youth crime, health outcomes, education and employment, and many more, they're holding us back. And the Voice to Parliament and Ullaru's statement from the heart is our way forward together.
Thanks so much. The next question is a really important one. The principle underlying it is equality of treatment in the Constitution. And the question is, how do I respond to the question, why do First Nations people need a voice to Parliament? What about other cultures that also live here? Don't they also need a voice? Kyra, I might start with you on this one.
So other cultures, I've actually presented and engaged with the multicultural community broadly here in West Australia, and they've advised me they do have a voice. So, you know, they have their groups where they have a voice and they have a say on matters that affect them, and that's why they're really in support of our voice, because they realise we don't have what they have. So, as I know from what I've heard from the multicultural community themselves, they feel blessed to be hosted by First Nations people on our country. They've also faced racism and discrimination, and that's why they stand beside us in this fight for justice, because they know what it's like not to have that when they hear of their ancestors who came here to Australia and what they also had to endure for them to be successful in Australia themselves.
And Dempsey?
Just very briefly, it's a great question and it's a tough one. If you look at it from the surface, you could probably very much understand where that's come from. But like I've said before, a voice to Parliament and Ullaru's statement from the heart, it is an uplifting effect for the whole of the nation. When we look at these statistics, we all hang our heads in shame. No one can look at these statistics and be proud of Australia as a nation when we have the most incarcerated people, when life expectancies, childbirth weights, employment, and recidivism is all at record lows, and we hold the record for most incarcerated people on the planet Earth. That's nothing to be proud of. And so the solutions that are currently in place, the solutions that governments have been implementing for the past however many years, clearly not all of them are working. And I do pay respect to people who have been working in this field for so long, and there have been some great successes, but some things are starting to slip backwards, and that's why we always talk about self-determination and reconciliation. This is another path for self-determination, and I think we as Australians are all diminished, and agree with what Kyra mentions, that other communities do have voices. Us Indigenous people, we're a shy mob. We're a very shy folk, and sometimes it's very hard to get us all at the one table. We haven't had that opportunity in the past, and this is why I think it's very important that we make that distinction. And also some other communities don't face the same issues that we face. Again, like I mentioned, some of the solutions that have been implemented just don't work. And so it's important that we go back to the grassroots, and we're not just listening to politicians, it's people from the communities who can come up with the solutions for our people. And that's what's at the heart of the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Thanks so much, Dempsey. And look, just on that, and to build on something Kyra said, more than 100 significant community organisations, including religious organisations and organisations that represent a wonderful wider range of cultural backgrounds, support the voice. And I think that's really important, that there's actually already been a recognition that there has been a voice for many communities. One only needs to read the Closing the Gap report to see that only 3 of 18 targets are on track. And in fact, the children not living with their parents, the gap is widening. And so there is a real sense of urgency that we need to do something here. But I do want to assure you that this has got incredibly widespread support through religious and sovereign communities. We're really up against it. So one last question, which is about treaty and the lack of detail on what that might mean. I think hopefully what you've got from today is there's really only a single issue on the referendum at the moment, and that is the voice to Parliament. What the Uluru Statement calls for is truth-telling and treaty. So in other words, this is the commencement of the journey towards reconciliation. That is the only constitutional question you're getting. You're not getting a question around treaty, but nevertheless, I think it is important. So Kyra, can I just briefly go to you? It sounds like there's a concern about the lack of detail around treaty. What would you say to that at this point in time?
I would say do your research on First Nations people in Canada, on the Māori people in New Zealand, and see how advanced they are in having their own businesses where they reinvest back into their communities, into their healing programs, into maintaining their culture, into supporting their elders. That's what self-determination is when their lives are thriving because they have a voice, but they also have input into resources on land and how they utilize it, but it's more around having their voice on things, that making sure that they also have economic development as a part of it. And that's what's been missing here in Australia for a very long time. We're a very rich, wealthy country. We're the top 10 wealthiest countries of the world, yet our people are dying as if we're living in third world conditions, or we're a third world underdeveloped country. And if you've got a social conscience, that does not sit right with me. And I'm sure it doesn't sit right with everybody. That's why we have reconciliation action plans, right? It's about actions around how you can have an impact in improving the quality of our lives.
Thanks so much, Kyra. And Dempsey, we're right up against time, but one final brief comment from you.
Yeah, no worries. Again, just to remind people, we're at Chapter 1, focuses on a representative voice. Not too much to talk about when it comes to treaty, because First Nations people haven't yet been widely consulted, as we don't have a voice at the present moment. For those who are keen, again, like Kyra mentioned, have a look at some other jurisdictions, Treaty of Waitangi, have a look at Queensland and Victoria state treaties, some of the great work being done there. Consultation for those treaties have been far and wide. So I'd imagine the same would be said when we do arrive at Chapter 2, but I wouldn't want that discussion on treaty to distract from the primary focus, which is a representational voice.
Hey, look, thanks so much. And you can tell the interest because the vast majority of our audience has stayed on right up to the last second, and we're right up against 1 o'clock. So there's immense interest. And just look, on behalf of ANZ, I'd like to thank both of you, Kyra and Dempsey. That was fantastic insight. We really greatly appreciate your time. And thanks for the ongoing education supporting ANZ employees making an informed choice. With that, I'll close the session. I really hope you found it informative. All the best for the rest of your day, and thank you.